The British public want a general election and they want it now. The latest polling from YouGov shows that 63% of respondents want the new Prime Minister to call an early general election, and less than a quarter think he or she shouldn't. Of course, it's the very last thing Tory MPs want, given their reputation is deep in the bin. But given we're about to get our second Prime Minister in less than 2 months, who hasn't been chosen via a general election, there's a pretty strong case for it. And even Tory voters seem able to see that the time has come for the nation to have a say. This week's BBC Question Time was in Cheltenham, and the topic of a general election came up. This woman explained why she thought it was time to call one.
The scenes in the House of Commons last night, the chaos in the lobbies. Charles Walker, the MP, spoke so eloquently about the state of the Conservative Party. I'm a lifelong Conservative, and I couldn't agree with him more. The fact Graham, I think, didn't know whether or not it was even a vote of no confidence, I think that's correct to say. The Conservative Party's gone from Rachel's brother, who I think, frankly, was a moral vacuum, and I honestly thought they couldn't come up with anyone worse. They found someone who's trashed the economy, who's ruined the Conservative Party for a generation, and I hear what Tony says, but I can't see the alternative when the country and the Conservative Party are in the absolute state that they are.
That reference there was to Graham Stewart, the Tory MP who mistakenly told the Commons that the fracking vote was not a confidence vote. The chaos that followed led to Truss's resignation the next day. Now, Cheltenham is a Tory constituency where they hold a very slim margin over the Lib Dems, but the audience was selected to mirror how England voted in the last election. Fiona Bruce put the question of a general election to them.
More of you here voted Conservative than for any other single party, because we're reflecting Parliament at the moment. Let me just get a show of hands. It's not scientific, but it's just to get an idea. Who here would like a general election? Huge. Gosh, that's almost all of you.
It was almost unanimous. I saw about 5 people who didn't put up their hand. The Mirror and The Independent have both launched petitions calling for a general election. So far, The Independent has over 300,000 signatures. The Mirror's, which was launched with the campaign group of 38 Degrees, has 80,000. There's also one, I think, on the official website, which has 700,000. But that actually has been running since the last crisis we had in government and the last time the Tories replaced the Prime Minister. So it's difficult to know when exactly people signed. Now, if there were a general election, Labour would walk it. This graphic shows the New Statesman's modelling of how many seats each party would be likely to win based on the latest polling. Labour would be set to win a huge majority with 509 seats compared to the Tories' 41. But although a Labour victory would be almost guaranteed if a general election were held soon, Keir Starmer still isn't giving us that much to get excited about. On Good Morning Britain, he was asked for his views on a possible nurses' strike.
The RCN is balloting its members, nurses, about strike action. They want a pay increase 5% above inflation. Do you back that?
Well, I completely understand why they're making that ask. Wages have been very low for a long time. They're working really hard and prices are going through the roof. I don't want to see a strike. They don't want to go on strike. What I want to see is that resolved. But I do understand that many working people, whether it's nurses or others, are really, really up against it now. And of course, they want negotiations to increase their wages. In the end, of course...
If you came into power and you were in charge of their wages, would you grant it?
Well, there's a mechanism to decide what that would be, and we would let that run its course. But I empathise, I understand why nurses are in the situation that they're in, why they're considering industrial action. But I don't want a strike to go ahead. They don't want a strike to go ahead.
Would you back it and would you grant it?
Well, there's a mechanism for dealing with their pay, and I would want that to run its course. Of course I would. But, you know, the government has put us in this position, and we need to get out of this position. The only way in the end to get out of this position is to deal with the cost of living crisis, because with inflation through the roof, prices through the roof, the economy tanking because of this government, we need the stability that settles this situation, because otherwise, you know, pay resolution in, you know, a few months' time is meaningless if inflation's taken prices through the roof in 6 months or 12 months. We need a longer-term answer to this.
Now, I totally understand. Look, Keir Starmer, he wants to be Prime Minister. There could be an election soon. You know, he doesn't want to be pictured standing on picket lines. I get that. What I found really unforgivable there, though, in that conversation was the argument that nurses shouldn't have a real pay cut is quite easy to make. And even if he wanted to remain non-committal, I don't think he should have remained non-committal. I think you should commit to a real terms pay rise for nurses. But there are so many things he could have brought up to, I suppose, educate the public, which no political risk at all, which he didn't. For example, there is currently a crisis in the NHS, a staffing crisis in the NHS. One of the big reasons we have a staffing crisis in the NHS is because real terms pay for nurses has been cut since 2010. It's still lower than 2010. So the TUC say the average nurse is £5,200 worse off than they were in 2010. Now, if you can't connect low pay for NHS workers with a staffing crisis in the NHS, what are you doing? I personally, want a general election now. I don't think we're going to get one, but I think it's a reasonable demand. I'm not particularly excited about Keir Starmer, but I would be really excited about having a government that was not the Conservatives after 12 years. It'd be much easier to pressure the Labour Party, I think, than it would be to pressure the Conservative Party. How are you feeling about the potential for a Labour government? They're 37 to 39 points ahead. Should people be getting excited, or should we be telling people, who cares? They're all the same.
Well, I think excitement would probably be a dangerous course to pursue, Michael. I think even if you don't intend to vote Labour, I think if you just want a functioning government which oversees legislation, I think you probably do want a general election. Even if you're a Conservative or Liberal Democrat, and that's just like a strange thing to say, the Tories have put themselves into such a hole here with, two successive prime ministers now who aren't the result of a general election. I really think just from a basic level of elementary competence administering the state, we have to do that. In terms of the ancillary point about Labour, should people be excited? I personally don't think Keir Starmer will deliver very much. I think there'll be some very small things. The pay offers to NHS staff might be 1% more than what the Tories were offering. It'll still be below inflation. And on the one hand, the reality is that, yes, the facts have changed. You've got 10% inflation. You have, no growth. We're looking at 4 or 5 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. Interest rate hikes are still going to come in. That's going to massively hit final demand. A recession could become a depression. So I understand the picture isn't looking good. Of course, by the way, a lot of that could change by 2024 if that's when we do have a general election. But right now, if we had one and Labour came in, I understand why Labour would want to be under-promising and hopefully over-delivering. I could be wrong. We don't really know Starmer's long game here. My view is that we'll get just 1 or 2 positive things, and actually the priority of Labour, agree or disagree, will be administering the state, listening to the OBR, listening to the Bank of England. That's it. We are more competent than the Tories, which, look, like you say, big upgrade on the Conservative Party, but it doesn't help the housing crisis. It doesn't help inequality. It doesn't help NHS waiting times, the fact that ambulances aren't getting to where they need to be, much under an hour right now. And I think this is something for the Labour right to think about here and consider. Even if you want to do basic problem solving right now, like creating a national care service, getting on top of A&E waiting times, getting on top of ambulance arrival times, building the kind of infrastructure we need to be a 21st century economy, just to do that basic stuff, you're actually looking now at tax rises that have only been touted in public by John McDonnell. Those are the facts. If you want to be, administering the state and, we're not going to run a deficit and we want to, show credibility to the markets, and you want to do the basic things of running the NHS, education, public transport, the basic stuff. Forget nationalisation. Forget anything that Starmer's pledged. The basic stuff. Then they're going to have to oversee quite extensive tax rises. Those are the facts. Doing politics in low growth, high inflation societies is extraordinarily difficult. Very, very difficult. And my personal view is the kinds of people that we have in British politics and the media don't have the aptitude or the inclination for it. And they certainly don't have the muscle memory. We haven't had these conditions really for 40, 50 years. I have very low expectations of Keir Starmer. That said, of course, infinitely preferable to a Conservative government. And on 1 or 2 policy areas, he may surprise us. And it's why I keep on saying to our audience, Michael, what 1, 2, 3 policies would you want to focus on? Because you can build a mass movement, say, around public ownership of rail and a £15 minimum wage and addressing the housing crisis. You can do that, and you can influence the Labour government, even that doesn't really want to do these things. You can't build a mass movement around everything. So I think that would be the question I would ask of our audience watching this or listening to this. What would you demand of a Labour government with a massive majority, which was really underwhelming and not delivering all the things you'd like to see? What are your one or two priorities and how would you push them?